Ontario's incoming Premier Doug Ford announced on Friday he's scrapping the province's cap-and-trade program. In response, Quebec and California closed their carbon markets to Ontario. So how does this system work? Have a look. Under the cap-and-trade system, businesses with high greenhouse gas emissions have limits or caps on how much they pollute. If they exceed those caps, they can buy permits to compensate. Permits can be bought through government-run auctions. Businesses can also buy permits, though, from other companies in California or Quebec that have extra to sell. Ontario companies have already bought $2.8 billion in emissions allowances. It's not really clear what will happen to those allowances now, but they could end up worthless. So what does Ontario's departure from the cap-and-trade market mean for companies that were already participating in it? We're back with the Power Panel, Brad Levine, Susan Smith, Tim Powers, and Marie Vastel. Tim, I'll start with you. A lot of question marks over sort of how this actually gets implemented, but popular decision? What do you think?
Well, no question marks as to what Doug Ford said he was going to do. I mean, I think we have all said since he got elected he wanted to hit the ground running. This is a symbolic act that will have significant repercussions. Where they spin out is yet to be seen. I think one of the arguments that I've heard made that may be plausible, I don't know if it will prove to be the case over time, that the businesses will save some money. They won't necessarily get back what they put in, but they'll save money in the longer term because they won't have to get into the cap and trade system. There may be lots of litigation that could cost the government of Ontario, or there may not be. I think, though, if you're an average citizen, and that's who Doug Ford believes elected him, they will be very happy with this announcement, and Ford can point to, as he's done when he was a councillor in Toronto, say, we're going to reduce expenses, we're going to get rid of the carbon tax that wasn't really in place anyway in Ontario, and say that that is done now or in the way to being done. The real test maybe with consumers will come if there's an impact on lowering the price of gas, because, of course, Mr. Ford said he wanted to lower the price of gas by 10 cents a litre, I believe. Does this have that impact? We'll see. But in the short term, he's got to show action. This is the showing of action. Long-term policy consequences, who the hell knows?
Susan,
I think it's more who the hell cares, right? I don't think Doug Ford actually cares about the long-term consequences. He wants to just go make a big announcement, say, I did this. I think the consequences, I do agree, remain to be seen. $2.8 billion that those businesses have spent money for to be able to reduce the emissions or reduce the overall emissions. They're going to want their money back. So not only is there going to be, the government is going to have to engage in litigation. I think those companies will be suing to get their money back. And the other piece is the carbon price will come in.
Exactly.
And there's federal legislation that says if your province does not have some kind of price on carbon, a price is going to come in. And in the end, Doug Ford's actions could actually end up costing Ontarians more, because the cap-and-trade system was working, that qualified under the new legislation, and the price on carbon could go up further in the end. But I think it's going to cost Ontarians, Doug Ford's actions are going to cost Ontarians more tomorrow than the cap-and-trade system is costing them today.
Do we know that for sure, Marie? I mean, I think, I don't know if you can calculate that at this point. We don't know for sure when. They're also fighting the federal carbon price, too, in court, along with Saskatchewan. And
oh, I think they're going to get a carbon tax imposed at some point. I don't think there's much doubt about that. But it's hard to tell if the cap-and-trade would have been cheaper than the carbon tax, because the government, when they announced the carbon tax details and how it will work, did recognize that they would have to reevaluate every time the federal carbon tax went up if it was equivalent to the cap-and-trade pricing mechanism. And they didn't give any guarantees that Quebec and Ontario were, you know, scot-free and they were good until 2020. So it remains to be seen what would have been cheaper. But I do agree that I think the government is going to end up paying to fight this in court against companies who, of course, will want their money back. He says that they're going to save money down the road. I'm pretty sure they're going to argue they want their money now. So, I mean, yes, it's an easy promise, you know, checked on your list on the first day or third day that you're waiting to get sworn in office, but I'm not really convinced that it's going to be sustainable down the road. And I suspect that this is indicative of all these efficiencies that Doug Ford promised to find, all these measures that he promised without costing, where we were going to see that there are repercussions to cutting stuff
Tim, I'll just get you to quickly respond, then I'll bring Brad in.
Yeah, I was going to say
you.
2 things quickly. Thank you.
Yeah,
You
I
my
saw your eyes light up there.
Your wonderful video vignette aside, which did a good job of trying to explain cap and trade, again, to the average person not engaged in this on a daily basis, none of this makes a lot of sense, right? So Ford is playing off that. The other thing he's playing off of, and Sue highlighted, is the federal government, yes, says it's going to come in and impose a tax. Well, who benefits from that politically? But Doug Ford, because he's going to blame Justin Trudeau, and he's going to say the same things that were said in Alberta under Peter Lougheed. Here comes Justin Trudeau's version of his father's national energy program. Again, right or wrong, the politics of this align up potentially very nicely for Doug Ford. The policy is a whole other discussion.
Brad, what do you think about that, the idea that the politics, that Doug Ford has a win as far as the politics go?
Well, we'll see. We're moving from a cap and trade system to the federal government's carbon pricing system. For those that live in Ontario, we had a price on carbon through cap and trade, and we're going to have a price on carbon when the federal government imposes it. So it's not like relief at the pumps. This is not going to bring down my heating costs. It's just going to shift the burden. The other thing, of course, is that Ford is going to be joining with Saskatchewan on the federal court case. Now, Rachel Notley today had a press conference with a mini cabinet shuffle. She was asked the question about what does this do federally for prices on carbons and those kinds of things. If Ford and Saskatchewan take on the federal government and lose in court, that's going to hurt, I think, other conservative parties who are currently in opposition who want to seek to scrap a carbon tax. So I think it's going to have a ripple effect throughout the system. The other thing that for Ford is, with the federal price on carbon, there's going to be a rebate that comes back to the province of Ontario from Ottawa, and they get to spend it how they want. So if you take a look at all the things that Ford wants to do, he's got $6 billion in cuts that he has to make. He wants to lower income tax predominantly for the higher end. He needs money. And the federal carbon pricing will actually deliver him money. So what Tim says is right. He gets a win because Trudeau made him, but he also gets cash from Ottawa because of the way in which the feds have set up their carbon pricing regime.
Well, we've seen history tells us some interesting things, though, about these sorts of court cases around resources and responsibility and jurisdictional responsibility. There have been lots on the East Coast about foreign overfishing and oil and gas and the like, and Canada did well when it came to outlining what their jurisdictional responsibilities were and proved that they were right, but they never won the public opinion argument around all of this. And this still is what it is all about at the end of the day. Perhaps the greatest travesty, though, is we do have to have some sort of mature, balanced approach to all of this. And you, I remember, interviewed the head of the Eco-Fiscal Commission, and that was Data We Commission. And the one thing that was clear in that data is the public is confused. They turn off people who say you must do everything you can for the environment. They also turn off people who say carbon tax is bad. However, they do get that where's the bird? What they ask about is where does it impact me? And nobody's really kind of dealing with that.
Susan, what do you think?
I think, well, yeah, I think I agree with you on that, Tim.
So I get a lot of people agreeing with me tonight. Something wrong here. What's wrong?
Something in the water tonight.
It remains to be seen. I think there is a bit of a political play. Well, there is a political play for Ford. That's why he's doing it. It remains to be seen how the implementation of a price on carbon at the federal level gets sold and told to Ontario voters. I think the federal government will have a good story when it comes into place. I think the bottom line is people recognize largely that it's time to do something about the kinds of emissions that we're doing. I think the current cap and trade system didn't have a direct impact on people's pocketbooks, or when they don't know the direct impact it has when they fill up the gas tanks or whatever. And the new system will have an impact. It's possible it could backfire on Doug Ford because the federal government could say, well, you guys scrapped what you had in there, so this is what the alternative is. It wasn't a surprise.
Marie, it's not just this promise or this announcement, but today Mr. Ford announced that a hiring freeze, end to subscription-based services, and limit on travel as well.
And no tea and coffee. None. So if the Queen comes, she can't get tea.
So it's like the CBC. There's no coffee.
Great water, though. Awesome water.
Well, what do you think about that? This was also what I was alluding to when I said he promised all these efficiencies, pretending there would be no cost. And of course there is a cost. And so he promised he wouldn't cut jobs. He promised time after time. Except that's what he's doing. You will get job cuts by attrition if you don't hire people in the
But he's
public
not
service.
I mean, but as far as selling that message, he's
but the end result is the same. People retire, you don't replace them, that job is cut. And so it was obvious from the get-go that is what would happen. That is always what happens when a government says that they're going to find efficiencies and do hiring freezes. And so I'm not surprised, but I also suspect that's not necessarily where it's going to end if he wants to find enough money for everything that he's promised.
Brad?
That's right.
Yeah, I hear you.
That's right. So, the honeymoon period, doing what I said I would do, those kinds of things will happen. I'm sure he'll take the 10 cents off the liter of gasoline before July 1 weekend or, in and around there, and the cheaper beer, all that kind of stuff. That's easy stuff. That's the low-hanging fruit that a new government can do. The real kicker is going to be when those efficiencies aren't just some bureaucrat pushing pencils in an office building downtown Toronto. It's when the doctors get fired and the nurses get fired and the teachers get fired, and it starts to affect people's daily lives where they can't. The wait times are longer at the hospitals. It takes longer to get in to see your doctor. The nursing home for your parents is worse off. That's when things really will turn for Mr. Ford. He's got to find $6 billion in efficiencies. That's not all going to be the odd accountant here and there.
But I'm sure he isn't hearing weeping and wailing from Ontarians as civil servants can't have tea and coffee now. I mean, he's pandering and playing the game he played during the election. Some of this is actually worth doing. And look, it's unfortunate. I have two civil servants in my family. They are not viewed in the greatest light by the broader public. Ford is playing to a narrative that even people beyond conservatives appreciate. Big savings will not come this way, but there will be some savings, and he'll win some plaudits for all of us.
Yeah, but those are peanuts compared to all the money he has to.
But he's got to. But he will say he's got to start somewhere. This is symbolically important. Symbols matter in politics. This is the first big symbolic act.
I think that, and I was joking about the tea and coffee. I mean, yes, they're cutting that. That's fine. I guess bring your own coffee to a meeting if you're a visitor. For your trade delegation, forget trying or sampling any Ontario goods and serving.
You can pay for them yourself, like everybody else does.
Ante-up. I think the one that concerns me that I saw in the short term is restricting travel as well, especially to intergovernmental meetings. So our federation works because our people talk to each other. And the more we're able to talk to each other, and sure, you can talk to each other on email and you can do Skype and everything like that, but there's a lot that can happen face to face. And if the provincial government under Ford in Ontario gets small and nickel and dimey on those kinds of things, that's actually going to hurt us as a province, and it's going to hurt us as a federation. And those are the kinds of things that worry me. He doesn't have the bigger experience to really understand. He's never sat at a FedProv table, so he has no clue of the value of that, and that's what concerns me in the long run.
And it's also surprising because you would think he needs some of his allies on some of the things that he wants to push, like the carbon tax that we're going back to. If he wants to fight it, you would think he would want to go to those meetings and kind of get a consensus or get more people on board and work on a strategy like
I'm
that.
sure he and Scott Moe are Skype or FaceTime.
Yeah.
Don't forget Jason. They're probably
They'll
instant
Snapchat
messaging.
each other.
Anyway, okay.